It began not with a kiss, but with a contract. In the dusty corners of early 18th and 19th century Europe and rural America, whispers floated from hearth to hearth about something called the marriage trial night. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't folklore. It was a real, sanctioned part of rural courtship. The idea? A man and woman, betrothed, but not yet married, were allowed, even encouraged, to spend the night together. In the same bed, under the same roof. But with one unusual condition. A wooden board. Known as bundling, this curious practice varied from town to town. But in many places, it meant literally placing a board between the man and woman in bed. A symbolic, and not so reliable, attempt at maintaining chastity while allowing the couple a chance to, well, talk. To bond. To see if they could stand the sound of each other's breathing before vows were made permanent. And in some communities, the board was optional. Older folks justified it as a form of testing compatibility. Young lovers whispered about it as a chance for stolen intimacy. And preachers, they tried to walk a very fine line. After all, trial nights could result in weddings, or pregnancies. Sometimes both. But why was this allowed in a time when morality was tied so tightly to purity? The answer, like so many things in history, is both practical and poetic. Marriage wasn't just about romance. It was about survival. Property. Work. Dowries. Fertility. Parents didn't want to risk marrying off their daughters to someone who might be abusive, sterile, or simply too strange. In this strange way, a trial night was a kind of rural insurance policy. A peek behind the curtain before the curtains were drawn for life. In many rural New England towns, it was custom for a courting couple to spend the night together, with permission. Not secretly. Not shamefully. Sometimes, the parents of the bride were in the next room. And when the candles were blown out, the creak of the bed frame wasn't always scandalous, it was expected. Now, not all trial nights were equal. In more conservative communities, bundling bags were used. These were essentially giant sleeping sacks with stitched separations to prevent touch. Sometimes, the lovers were sewn into the bed, quite literally, by the girl's mother. It was love, monitored, measured, but still blooming in the dark. But not everyone approved. Some ministers called it tempting fate. Others believed it gave young people too much leeway. There were fiery sermons, public scoldings. In Puritan settlements, some couples caught bundling without marriage were fined, or worse, placed in the stocks for all to see. But still, the practice continued, because in many places, it was tradition. Quiet, understood, practiced for generations. And sometimes, the trial night wasn't about chastity at all. Sometimes, it was exactly what it sounded like, a trial. To see if the man could perform. To ensure that heirs could be produced. Some families insisted on proof, physical or otherwise, before the wedding bells rang. In those cases, love was measured not in courtship or poetry, but in fertility. In one Pennsylvania Dutch community, it was customary for a woman's mother to check the sheets the next morning, not for shame, but for celebration. A child meant marriage. A child meant family honor. And whether or not the couple liked each other after that was a separate matter entirely. And so, in flickering candlelight, under creaky rafters and patchwork quilts, thousands of young couples over hundreds of years lay side by side, hearts pounding. Not yet wed, not yet judged, but already navigating the strange intersection of love, duty, and custom. And for those watching from the outside, parents, neighbors, local midwives, the trial night was just another step in a very public process. Marriage wasn't just between two people. It was between two families, two futures. And this strange custom, as awkward as it may seem now, was simply part of the dance. But not all trial nights ended in wedding bells. Some ended in tears, others in scandal, and occasionally, in mystery. In the next section, we'll meet a young woman who vanished the morning after her trial night, and the town that was never the same again. Her name was Clarabelle Finch, and she was known for her laugh, the kind that startled birds from trees and made the schoolboys in Maple Hollow stumble over their grammar. She worked at the milliner's shop by the river and lived with her widowed father in a small cottage with peeling blue shutters. In the spring of 1811, Clara was promised to Elias Markham, a young farmer whose fields were as wide as his shoulders. He was quiet, respected, and had inherited a sizable dairy operation after a fire took his parents. The match was practical. Her father approved. The church ladies smiled and whispered blessings. But Clara was hesitant. She had confessed to her friend Elsie that Elias looked at her like she was soil to be tilled. There was no poetry in his courtship, no flirtation. Just quiet hands and the promise of warm bread and strong fences. And yet, the engagement was announced. The date was set, and a trial night was arranged in the Finch household. The bed was prepared in the guest room. A board was placed. Clara's father poured 2 glasses of cider. The neighbors knew. Everyone knew. And as the evening came, the candles flickered low, and the couple retired behind the thin wooden door. What happened next has been retold for generations. The next morning, Elias was found sitting on the front porch, fully dressed, eyes bloodshot, face pale. He said nothing. Clara's bed was empty. Her nightdress was found folded at the foot of the mattress. Her boots were gone. The window was open. She was never seen again. Some believed she had fled into the woods, that her fear of a life with Elias had overpowered her duty. Others whispered of something darker. Perhaps Elias had done something unspeakable and then staged the scene. The sheriff questioned him. He denied everything. He said Clara had insisted on opening the window, that she wanted to feel the spring air. He claimed to have fallen asleep. When he woke, she was gone. The search lasted weeks. Posters were drawn by hand. The river was dragged. But no body surfaced. No letter was found. Just silence. Clara's father never recovered. He kept the shutters closed and refused to speak of that night. As for Elias, he moved away, remarried in another county, and died decades later with the same story on his lips. But Maple Hollow remembered. For years, no girl in that town agreed to a trial night. The practice faded, buried under fear. In the minds of many, Clara had become a ghost, not just of a missing girl, but of a forgotten custom's cost. Historians now believe Clara may have run away, possibly to a cousin in Delaware who lived near the coast. Some letters suggest she boarded a ship and changed her name. Others hold fast to the darker version, murder, shame, and a town's collective denial. Whatever the truth, her story became legend. And it raised a question. Was the trial night ever truly about love? Or was it about control? Because in many cases, what was framed as a romantic preview was little more than a test, one that women often didn't agree to freely. Consent blurred in the presence of expectation. And Clara, for all her laughter and wit, may have simply decided not to play along. But not every story ended in tragedy. In the next section, we'll journey into the hills of rural Wales, where the bundling board was not just accepted, but celebrated. And where one couple turned their trial night into a 60-year love story. Across the Atlantic and far from the ghost stories of Maple Hollow, the Welsh countryside told a softer tale. In the village of Lanhedred, tucked between green hills and slow-moving sheep, there lived a girl named Merwen Griffith. She had freckles like cinnamon and wore her skirts a little too high above the ankle, which caused no small amount of gossip from the churchyard. At 17, Merwen caught the eye of Owain Pugh, the baker's boy who whistled while kneading dough and always had flour on his elbows. Their flirtation began like most in the valley, over a spilled basket of apples and a shared umbrella during a sudden storm. It blossomed in the pews of the chapel and deepened through letters left in fence cracks. When the courtship turned serious, both families agreed it was time for a bundling. But here in Wales, bundling had a different rhythm. There was no secrecy, no shame. The tradition was woven into the fabric of rural life. It didn't matter that the young couple would share a bed. What mattered was the board between them, the rules, and the respect. A wooden plank, smooth and pale, was placed down the center of the bed. Merwen slept on one side, Owain on the other. She wore 2 bonnets, 3 petticoats, and mittens. He wore a long flannel nightshirt, his legs tucked tightly under wool blankets. And they talked, for hours. Neighbors said you could hear their laughter through the walls. Stories about childhood, dreams of a bakery with her name on the sign, arguments about the best way to braid bread. The board kept them apart physically, but emotionally, something was stitching itself together. They bundled 3 nights in a row. And on the 4th morning, when the sun poured through the shutters like honey, Owain asked for her hand with a small loaf of sweetbread he'd baked himself. It was shaped like a heart, and slightly burned on one edge. Merwen said yes. Years later, long after the wedding and the babies and the bakery's third expansion, a traveling writer passed through Lanhedredge and asked the old couple what they remembered most about their courtship. Merwen chuckled and said, "We fell in love on opposite sides of a board." This story, sweet as it is, wasn't unusual for rural Wales in the 18th and 19th centuries. Bundling, or caru rybwrdd, loving on the board, was not seen as improper, but as essential. In isolated farming communities, where winters were long and walls were thin, bundling offered young couples a chance to truly know one another before a lifelong commitment. It was supervised, often arranged by parents, and treated with both seriousness and care. Not everyone passed the test. If conversations stalled or if tempers clashed, the engagement could be broken off before a wedding ever took place. It was, in many ways, a kind of emotional audition. And though not without its awkwardness, many elders claimed it prevented unhappy marriages. But bundling wasn't only Welsh. Across the ocean, similar customs existed among the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Puritans of New England, and even some communities in colonial Virginia. What differed was the attitude. Some saw it as dangerous temptation, others as a quaint tradition, and others still, as we'll soon discover, used it as an excuse for something much stranger. By the time bundling crossed the Atlantic and reached the cold, flinty soil of New England, it had shed much of its warmth. Puritan communities, settled in towns like Salem, Plymouth, and Concord, believed deeply in modesty, virtue, and suspicion. Even the flicker of laughter after dark could raise questions. Yet, strangely enough, they kept the practice of bundling. They just wrapped it in layers of guilt, surveillance, and fear. In some households, bundling became a test of spiritual fortitude. A young man might be invited to spend the night beside his intended fiancée, but only under strict conditions. Her parents would remain awake in the next room, listening for footsteps. The room would remain lit by a single candle until midnight. And both parties were expected to wear bundling sacks, essentially long cloth tubes that tied at the neck and feet, sealing the sleeper inside like a rolled sausage. It wasn't romantic. It was awkward. And that was the point. The idea, according to Reverend Nathaniel Wadsworth of Connecticut, was to test the purity of the young while allowing their hearts to speak. But hearts weren't the only things speaking, apparently. One infamous case in Springfield, Massachusetts, involved a girl named Tabitha Gray, daughter of a devout tanner, and her suitor Ezekiel Marsh, a pious-looking boy with curly hair and dangerous eyes. They were permitted to bundle, one night only, with a heavy oak board placed firmly between them and Tabitha's younger brother snoring in a nearby cradle. By morning, the cradle was empty, the board was cracked, and Tabitha was pregnant. The scandal spread fast. Tabitha was brought before the town council and forced to name names. Ezekiel denied everything. Her father blamed the devil. The bundling board was burned in public. And still, more bundling continued. Because here's the strange part. For all their fire and brimstone sermons, Puritan communities didn't ban bundling outright. Why? Because it served a purpose. Marriage was an economic contract, not just a romantic ideal. Parents wanted to be sure their daughter's suitor wasn't a drunk, a brute, or a fool. And bundling, however clumsy, offered a rare glimpse into that. A night of talking in the dark revealed more than weeks of chaperoned walks. If the couple didn't click, they could break off the match before church bells and dowries were involved. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. Some clever girls used false boards, hollow in the middle. Some boys bribed younger siblings to look the other way. And in the most daring cases, couples skipped the board altogether and simply promised to act married for one night. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. In 1679, a young couple in Rhode Island agreed to a bundling night with no supervision. The next morning, they claimed to be spiritually wed. The town elders were not amused. A public whipping followed, for both of them. It was a system both sacred and absurd, intimate and policed. And though many scoff at it now, bundling was often seen as a better alternative than rushed, regret-filled marriages. At least with bundling, you got to hear the other person snore before saying I do. But while Puritan bundling was laced with judgment and shame, a different version was unfolding just miles away, one involving contracts, witnesses, and even financial negotiations. By the time bundling crossed the Atlantic and reached the cold, flinty soil of New England, it had shed much of its warmth. Puritan communities, settled in towns like Salem, Plymouth, and Concord, believed deeply in modesty, virtue, and suspicion. Even the flicker of laughter after dark could raise questions. Yet, strangely enough, they kept the practice of bundling. They just wrapped it in layers of guilt, surveillance, and fear. In some households, bundling became a test of spiritual fortitude. A young man might be invited to spend the night beside his intended fiancée, but only under strict conditions. Her parents would remain awake in the next room, listening for footsteps. The room would remain lit by a single candle until midnight. And both parties were expected to wear bundling sacks, essentially long cloth tubes that tied at the neck and feet, sealing the sleeper inside like a rolled sausage. It wasn't romantic. It was awkward. And that was the point. The idea, according to Reverend Nathaniel Wadsworth of Connecticut, was to test the purity of the young while allowing their hearts to speak. But hearts weren't the only things speaking, apparently. One infamous case in Springfield, Massachusetts, involved a girl named Tabitha Gray, daughter of a devout tanner, and her suitor Ezekiel Marsh, a pious-looking boy with curly hair and dangerous eyes. They were permitted to bundle, one night only, with a heavy oak board placed firmly between them and Tabitha's younger brother snoring in a nearby cradle. By morning, the cradle was empty, the board was cracked, and Tabitha was pregnant. The scandal spread fast. Tabitha was brought before the town council and forced to name names. Ezekiel denied everything. Her father blamed the devil. The bundling board was burned in public. And still, more bundling continued. Because here's the strange part. For all their fire and brimstone sermons, Puritan communities didn't ban bundling outright. Why? Because it served a purpose. Marriage was an economic contract, not just a romantic ideal. Parents wanted to be sure their daughter's suitor wasn't a drunk, a brute, or a fool. And bundling, however clumsy, offered a rare glimpse into that. A night of talking in the dark revealed more than weeks of chaperoned walks. If the couple didn't click, they could break off the match before church bells and dowries were involved. Of course, not everyone followed the rules. Some clever girls used false boards, hollow in the middle. Some boys bribed younger siblings to look the other way. And in the most daring cases, couples skipped the board altogether and simply promised to act married for one night. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. In 1679, a young couple in Rhode Island agreed to a bundling night with no supervision. The next morning, they claimed to be spiritually wed. The town elders were not amused. A public whipping followed, for both of them. It was a system both sacred and absurd, intimate and policed. And though many scoff at it now, bundling was often seen as a better alternative than rushed, regret-filled marriages. At least with bundling, you got to hear the other person snore before saying I do. But while Puritan bundling was laced with judgment and shame, a different version was unfolding just miles away, one involving contracts, witnesses, and even financial negotiations. In the bustling colonial town of New Amsterdam, which would later become New York City, the Dutch settlers brought with them customs that mingled pragmatism with passion. Unlike the Puritan stern, shadowed bundling, the Dutch bruiloftnacht, wedding night, was a carefully observed trial period, steeped in legal formality and candlelit negotiation. Here, marriage was not just a sacred bond but a contract between families, sometimes as much about property and alliances as about love. The trial night was often the first and only chance for the bride and groom to share a private moment before the marriage was officially sealed in church and state. But this night was more than just a private encounter. It was a legal experiment. In some cases, the couple would be left alone for several nights, under the watchful eyes of family, friends, and witnesses stationed just beyond the bedroom door. Their behavior, temper, and even their physical compatibility could determine if the marriage would continue. Contracts stipulated terms that might include provisions for dowries, property rights, and even grounds for annulment, all contingent on the outcome of this trial. If the couple found they could not live together, the marriage could be dissolved without scandal. But if they chose to stay together, the contract was signed and the community blessed the union. The candlelight of these rooms flickered over faces tense with hope and fear, a mixture of anticipation and dread. Imagine Elizabeth van der Meer, dressed in a deep russet wool gown trimmed with simple lace, sitting nervously beside Johann Pieters, whose indigo tunic bore the subtle embroidery of a prosperous merchant family. They spoke little but listened intently, the weight of generations resting on this night. In some cases, this night was marked by laughter and whispered promises. In others, by silence, cold shoulders, or angry words. Local court records tell of couples petitioning for separation after the trial night, citing irreconcilable differences or unpleasant dispositions. One woman, Maria Junssen, famously declared she would rather tend sheep than share a bed with a man so ill-tempered. But for many, the Bruilofnacht was a chance, a precious, fragile window, to glimpse what life might be like beyond the vows. It was a night filled with uncertainty, yet hope, with rules, yet rebellion. And through it all, the flickering candle flames witnessed centuries of love stories, heartbreaks, and decisions that shaped families and communities. In the American South during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the idea of a formal marriage trial night took on a more subtle, communal shape, less a strict legal event and more a dance of courtship woven through music, gatherings, and unspoken social tests. Young couples would not rush into bedchambers under watchful eyes. Instead, they navigated their suitability through a series of social interactions marked by rhythm, proximity, and whispered conversation. At gatherings called cotillion balls or informal barn dances, suitors and their intended partners danced for hours beneath lantern light, the music serving as both entertainment and an intricate courtship ritual. Each dance was a test of grace, patience, and compatibility. Would he notice her favorite tune? Would she shy away from his bold steps or meet them with equal confidence? Families observed closely, gauging whether the couple's connection could weather the pressures of life in a frontier town where survival often depended on alliances as much as affection. For some, the trial wasn't a single night but an entire season of courting, stretching from spring through harvest, a slow burn of shared meals, chaperoned visits, and secret glances. Court records and personal diaries from this era reveal that suitors sometimes lived under the same roof with the family for months, working the land alongside their beloved's kin, all the while proving their character and dedication. One journal from a young woman named Abigail Turner describes her anxiety over her suitor's dance skills but ultimately falling for his quiet kindness during long walks by the river. Despite the gentler tone of Southern courtship, these months-long trials could be just as tense as any formal trial night. Whispers of scandal could ruin reputations. A wrong word or gesture might close doors forever. In this world, love was tested not behind closed doors but out in the open, under the watchful eyes of neighbors and the steady pulse of fiddle and drum. And when the time finally came for a formal proposal, often delivered during a family supper or community gathering, it was the culmination of many small tests, each step carefully weighed. But what of the nights after the proposal? Did Southern couples enjoy peaceful evenings? Or were there other trials to face? Next, we'll explore the quieter, more private worlds of early Victorian America, where the concept of trial nights took on a new, sometimes darker, meaning behind the parlors and lace curtains. As the 19th century unfolded, especially in Victorian America and Britain, courtship and marriage trials became shrouded in an intense layer of privacy and propriety. Yet the pressure to prove suitability remained as heavy as ever. Unlike the communal dances of the South, the Victorian era emphasized strict boundaries between men and women, especially before marriage. But this did not stop young couples from seeking ways to test their compatibility, albeit in more secretive, sometimes unsettling ways. The term trial night now took on a slightly different meaning. It often referred to the first night newlyweds spent together, which could be filled with uncertainty, fear, and even anxiety. In many cases, this night was the first time the couple shared physical intimacy, sometimes after only brief acquaintance, and with little prior knowledge of one another. Due to societal taboos, young women were expected to remain pure and inexperienced, a fact that led to many anxious moments for both spouses. Some families even employed midwives or matrons to discreetly check the bride's virginity after the wedding night, turning what should have been a tender moment into a medical and social ordeal. Furthermore, the trial extended beyond the physical realm. Newlywed couples faced the pressure of producing heirs, managing a household, and navigating the complex social codes of Victorian life, all while hiding any doubts or discomfort. Letters and diaries from the period reveal stories of young brides who felt trapped by expectations, unsure whether the love they imagined would survive the realities of marriage. Yet, there were exceptions. Some couples took their time, communicating through letters before and after marriage, forging emotional bonds despite the era's restraints. In rural areas, and among less wealthy families, the realities of daily life, shared labor, managing farms, and raising children, often cemented bonds more strongly than any romantic ideal. These trial nights were not just about passion or propriety, but about survival and partnership. The social weight of marriage, combined with the high stakes of physical intimacy and family expectations, made this night one of the most fraught and defining moments in a person's life. As we move forward, the story continues into the early 20th century, where marriage trials evolved yet again, blending tradition with modern ideas about love, companionship, and personal choice. As the 20th century dawned, the institution of marriage began to shift, shaped by new social forces, urban life, and changing ideas about love and partnership. The rigid customs of the Victorian era slowly loosened, but the marriage trial remained a critical, if evolving, part of courtship. In burgeoning cities, where anonymity replaced tight-knit rural communities, couples found more freedom and more challenges. Instead of formal trial nights, some couples began to live together before marriage in what was then called companionate marriage, testing compatibility in everyday life. This shift was controversial. Many still clung to old moral codes, while others quietly embraced the chance to know their partner better before committing for life. In working-class neighborhoods, economic pressures added urgency to marriage decisions. Young couples balanced love with the practical need for financial stability. Meanwhile, World War I introduced its own complexities. Many soldiers married quickly before deployment, sometimes never truly knowing their spouses. Letters became lifelines, and courtships happened across miles and trenches. For those left on the home front, the war years redefined gender roles, with women entering the workforce and gaining a new sense of independence, changing the dynamics of marriage forever. Trial nights were no longer just about physical consummation or family approval. They became moments when two individuals navigated the unknown, balancing tradition with the promise of modern love. But the shadows of past customs lingered. Society still judged harshly those who strayed from the norm, and many young couples faced secrecy, fear, and social risk. As the decades rolled on, the rise of cinema, radio, and mass media introduced new ideas about romance, shaping expectations and fueling dreams. Songs, films, and magazines told stories of love tested and triumphant, subtly rewriting what a marriage trial could be. Yet, underneath it all, the core question remained unchanged. Could two people, with all their flaws and hopes, build a life together? This question has echoed through history, shaping the intimate moments behind every marriage trial. Not all marriage trials followed the quiet path of tradition. Some erupted into scandal and spectacle, capturing the gossip of entire towns and even newspapers. One such story unfolded in 1872 in a small New England village, where a young woman named Abigail challenged societal norms with a trial night that shocked her community. She was engaged to a prosperous farmer, but rumors swirled that she had secretly met another man in town, a traveling musician with a roguish charm. On the appointed night, Abigail invited her fiancé and family to the farmhouse, where the trial was expected to confirm their union. Instead, the musician appeared at the door, playing a haunting tune that silenced the room. Abigail's eyes met his, and whispers spread. Was this an act of defiance or a cry for freedom? Her trial night became a standoff between duty and desire, testing not just her heart but the very fabric of community expectations. Elsewhere, in a bustling industrial city, a wealthy heiress used her trial night to assert control over her future. Determined not to be a passive participant, she invited her suitor to a private parlor, where she grilled him on his character, ambitions, and past, a rare reversal of traditional roles. Her sharp questions unsettled many, but those who understood knew this was a woman ahead of her time, turning marriage trial night into a negotiation of equals. Some trials ended in quiet acceptance, others ignited feuds. In one southern town, a trial night led to a duel between rival brothers, both vying for the same bride's hand. The duel was forbidden, but honor dictated otherwise, and the shooting left scars, both physical and emotional, that lingered for generations. These stories, wild and wrenching, reveal how marriage trial night was more than a private affair. It was a stage where personal passions met social pressures, sometimes combusting in unforgettable ways. Yet amid the drama, many couples found genuine connection and love, proving that even in the most turbulent trials, hope endured. Marriage trial night was steeped not only in lore and community expectations but also in a rich tapestry of rituals and superstitions, whispered secrets meant to guide lovers and families through uncertainty. In many rural communities, young couples observed peculiar customs believed to reveal their future happiness or doom. One common practice involved the bride-to-be placing a sprig of rosemary under her pillow the night before the trial, hoping to dream of her true love or receive a sign from beyond. If the rosemary wilted by morning, it was taken as a bad omen, a warning to reconsider the match. In some villages, the couple was instructed to avoid mirrors after dusk on trial night, for reflections might trap their souls or reveal hidden truths best left unseen. Others carried small charms sewn into their clothing, tiny horseshoes, hand-carved wooden hearts, or pressed wildflowers, tokens meant to protect against jealousy, misfortune, or spiteful neighbors. In Pennsylvania Dutch communities, a favorite superstition was to sprinkle salt along the doorstep before the suitor's arrival, a shield against evil spirits and curses. In Scotland and Ireland, it was believed that a black cat crossing the path during trial night spelled disaster, while spotting a robin or swallow was a blessing. The night itself was often marked by a ritual knocking, a rhythmic pattern to announce the suitor's presence, a secret code passed down through generations. Sometimes, the knocking was accompanied by a song or poem, lending a lyrical quality to the event and soothing nervous hearts. But not all superstitions were gentle. In some New England towns, it was said that if the bride's glove fell to the floor during the trial, the marriage would end in sorrow. Others believed that spilling salt at the door would curse the union, while burning a candle at midnight without it blowing out guaranteed lifelong happiness. These customs reveal the blend of hope and fear that colored marriage trial night, a night when love, law, and legend collided under flickering candlelight. Families and lovers clung to these signs, desperate to glimpse the threads of fate woven into the unknown future. In the days and weeks before the marriage trial night, the air in the village was thick with anticipation and, often, anxiety. Families on both sides prepared themselves with a mixture of hope and apprehension, aware that the outcome would ripple far beyond the couple alone. In small communities, news traveled fast, neighbors whispered behind shutters, children exchanged half-heard tales, and the local tavern buzzed with speculation. For many, the trial night was as much a public event as a private one, a social drama that engaged the entire village. Families who hoped to cement alliances or secure wealth weighed the stakes carefully. A prosperous farmer's daughter marrying a young blacksmith was no simple romance. It was a transaction intertwined with land, labor, and legacy. Economic concerns shadowed even the most tender declarations of affection. Meanwhile, the young couples wrestled with their own doubts and fears. Did they truly know one another? Could they face the challenges of a shared life? Was this love, or merely convenience shaped by circumstance? The looming trial night became a crucible, forcing these questions into sharp relief. Some couples sought counsel from trusted elders or clergy, while others retreated into silence. Amid the murmur of gossip and expectation, a few found moments of genuine tenderness, secret letters, stolen glances, whispered promises beneath the harvest moon. Yet, tensions often flared. Family disagreements erupted over dowries or promises made and broken. Old rivalries resurfaced, and even the village priest sometimes found himself mediating disputes rather than offering blessings. Through it all, the couple's fate seemed suspended, hanging in balance like the flickering flame of a candle in a drafty parlor. As trial night approached, nerves tightened and hearts raced, for the evening would decide not only the union of two souls but the course of entire families. As dusk fell on the appointed evening, the village seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors, friends, and curious onlookers began to gather outside the bride's family home, their murmurs weaving a tapestry of excitement and apprehension. The house itself was a modest timber-framed building, its wooden porch lit by flickering oil lamps and candles set in iron sconces. Inside, the bride prepared with a mixture of hope and nervousness, donning her best gown, often homemade, embroidered with care, sometimes patched from earlier wear but always treasured. The groom, dressed in his Sunday best, arrived with a small group of his own family and friends, their footsteps crunching softly on the frost-hardened earth. As the groom approached the door, he was met by the bride's family, who observed him closely, sizing up not only his appearance but his demeanor. The door was opened with a ceremonious air, but it was not yet time for celebration. The bride and groom exchanged cautious glances, aware that the night's true purpose was still to unfold. Seated in the dimly lit parlor, the families faced each other across a sturdy wooden table. Old portraits hung on the walls, their gilt frames catching the candlelight and casting golden glimmers. The village priest or an elder might be present to oversee proceedings, lending the event a sense of solemnity. The room was heavy with unspoken words, each person waiting for the first move, the moment when tradition would shift from observation to action. The trial night had begun, and with it, the delicate dance of courtship and judgment. Once gathered in the parlor, the trial night took on a rhythm all its own, part social visit, part subtle examination. The families engaged in polite conversation, discussing mundane matters like the weather, crops, or village news, all while watching the couple with careful eyes. The bride's family sought to discern the groom's character. Was he respectful? Attentive? Honest in his speech? The groom's family observed the bride, her manners, her modesty, and her ease in the household. But the true test was not in words alone. The couple was often left alone briefly, given the chance to speak privately, a rare gift in a tightly-knit community where privacy was scarce. Here, they might share whispered hopes, hesitations, or laughter, their guarded hearts tentatively opening. Guests, meanwhile, noted any signs of tension or warmth, a hand lightly resting on an arm, a shy glance, or a quick withdrawal. Sometimes, older relatives offered gentle warnings or advice, their voices low but firm, reminders of the stakes involved. The room was charged with anticipation, every gesture and phrase weighed as if in a delicate balance. Despite the formality, moments of genuine connection sometimes blossomed, a shared joke, a mutual smile, small sparks that hinted at love's possibility. By the end of the evening, much could be read between the lines. After the guests had retired to the other room, the couple found themselves alone in the dimly lit chamber, the flicker of candlelight casting gentle shadows on worn wooden walls. This was their rare opportunity, a quiet space where pretense softened and true feelings might surface. He might clear his throat nervously, searching for the right words. She might fidget with a handkerchief, eyes lowered yet glimmering with curiosity. They exchanged stories of childhood, of hopes for the future, and fears kept hidden during the formal gathering. In some cases, the groom revealed his worries about his ability to provide. The bride shared her dreams of companionship and trust. Silence often spoke louder than words, a lingering glance, a hesitant smile, or the brush of fingertips. Sometimes the conversation faltered, awkward pauses filling the room, reminding both that these were strangers bound by expectation. In other cases, warmth grew quickly, and laughter bubbled forth, breaking the ice and forging an unexpected bond. Yet always, the weight of the family's expectations lingered, like a quiet shadow in the corner. The trial night was as much a test of courage as affection. Could these two souls face the uncertain path ahead? As dawn crept over the horizon, the trial night came to its tense conclusion, not in whispered promises or tender embraces, but in the verdicts passed by watchful family members and keen neighbors. While the young couple rested, or perhaps lay awake, pondering the night's moments, their relatives gathered once more to discuss what they had seen and heard. Eyes sharpened like hawks, they dissected every glance and gesture, every word spoken and unspoken. Was the bride's laughter genuine, or a polite mask? Did the groom's nervousness signal sincerity or inadequacy? In communities where marriages often meant alliances of land, wealth, or reputation, approval from elders was paramount. Families weighed prospects carefully, their voices low but laden with meaning. Sometimes, a match was blessed with cautious optimism. They seem well matched, God willing. Other times, murmurs of doubt spread quickly. He does not look strong enough for our family, or she seemed distant, perhaps not the right match. Gossip rippled through the village like wildfire, shaping reputations and futures. Neighbors shared their own interpretations and advice, sometimes with kindness, often with a sharp edge. In the harsh social landscape of the time, a failed trial night could mean rejection, heartbreak, or even scandal. But a successful match could secure not just a marriage, but social standing, inheritance, and hope for the future. For many, these verdicts were final. For others, negotiations might stretch weeks or months, with further visits and trials. The marriage trial night was thus both a personal and communal event, bridging private desires and public expectations. Not every marriage trial night followed the expected script. Some unfolded with surprising twists that challenged tradition and left lasting impressions on their communities. There were tales of couples who, despite family disapproval or awkward encounters, found genuine affection and built strong partnerships. One such story tells of young Eliza and Thomas, whose trial night was fraught with silence and hesitation. Eliza's family whispered doubts, convinced Thomas lacked the stature for their daughter. Yet, over time, their quiet patience and kindness blossomed into deep love, defying initial judgments. Conversely, some trial nights ended abruptly in scandal. A spirited young woman named Mary was discovered exchanging sharp words with her suitor, leading to a fiery argument that echoed through the household. The trial night ended with the couple parting, their prospects forever altered by that stormy evening. These stories circulated widely, becoming lessons or warnings for others. They reflected the complex dance between societal expectations and personal desires. Trial nights could also reveal secrets or prompt revelations. A suitor's true character might emerge under pressure, or hidden ailments disclosed quietly in the dim light. In some cases, trial nights paved the way for unexpected alliances. Neighbors mended fences or forged friendships through these intimate communal rituals. The weight of these evenings extended beyond the couple, shaping village life, inheritance, and even local politics. And so, the legacy of marriage trial nights remained etched in family histories and local law, a testament to a time when love and marriage were intertwined with survival and social order. As the 19th century progressed, the practice of marriage trial nights slowly began to wane. Changing social norms, legal reforms, and the rise of romantic courtship shifted how people approached marriage. Industrialization brought new opportunities and different social structures, drawing young people to towns and cities where traditional customs held less sway. With the expansion of transportation and communication, courtship letters and public social events replaced secretive trial nights. Legal changes also played a significant role. Marriage laws became stricter, emphasizing formal ceremonies and official consent over informal, community-sanctioned trials. Clergy and civil authorities increasingly discouraged practices like trial nights, viewing them as outdated or even immoral. Public opinion shifted as well, with growing emphasis on personal choice, love, and compatibility rather than economic convenience or family obligation. The rise of Victorian ideals prized chastity and decorum, which clashed with the sometimes raw realities of trial nights. Yet, in some rural or isolated areas, the practice lingered longer. The communal nature of small villages meant that older traditions persisted, passing quietly from generation to generation. Historians and folklorists later viewed marriage trial nights as a fascinating window into past lives, illustrating the balance between pragmatism and romance, fear and hope, duty and desire. Despite their decline, the echoes of trial nights influenced later courtship rituals and helped shape modern concepts of relationship negotiation and consent. By the late 19th century, marriage had undergone a dramatic transformation, from a community-centered contract with practical concerns to a legally binding union focused on personal consent and romance. Courts and lawmakers introduced stricter regulations around marriage licenses, bans, and ceremonies. Marriages now required formal vows before clergy or civil officials, with legal documents ensuring clear consent from both parties. Trial nights, with their informal and experimental nature, conflicted with this new legal framework. The idea of testing a spouse before marriage was seen as risky, potentially undermining the sanctity and seriousness of the contract. The state's involvement also meant that disputes once settled quietly within villages now faced official scrutiny. Divorce laws, though still harsh and rare, started to emerge, replacing the trial night's function as a way to avoid unhappy unions. Despite these changes, the underlying human concerns remained: how to choose a compatible partner, how to ensure safety and happiness in marriage. The law sought to standardize and protect marriage, but the human heart continued to navigate desire, suspicion, and hope. As legal reforms reshaped marriage, courtship rituals became more formal and governed by strict social rules, especially for women, whose reputations were tied closely to virtue and propriety. Young women were expected to dress modestly, avoid unsupervised meetings with suitors, and rely heavily on chaperones. Letters replaced many face-to-face conversations, carrying secret hopes and fears between young hearts. Trial nights, once a practical way to assess a partner's character and habits, faded into memory, replaced by carefully orchestrated social events. Church socials, barn dances, and formal visits where every word and gesture was measured. Women were often caught between societal expectations and personal desires. Some longed for the freedoms trial nights offered, a chance to see the man beyond his polished surface. Others embraced the security the new rules promised, even if it meant sacrificing spontaneity. Yet even in this tightened world, whispers of secret meetings, coded letters, and hidden trials persisted. Love, after all, rarely follows the law precisely. Amid the strict rules and social expectations, the true feelings of many men and women from the era survived through their diaries and letters, offering rare glimpses into their hearts and struggles. One young woman from rural Pennsylvania wrote of secret meetings beneath moonlight, where whispered promises and stolen touches defied the watchful eyes of chaperones. She described the thrill and fear of bending the rules, knowing the consequences if caught. A soldier stationed far from home penned heartfelt letters to his beloved, confessing his longing and fears. His words conveyed not only love but the heavy weight of uncertainty. Would their relationship survive distance, war, and the harsh judgments of their community? Meanwhile, a widower's journal chronicled his cautious steps toward remarriage, wary of both scandal and the emotional risks involved. He detailed his hope for a partner who would be both companion and caretaker, yet his entries reveal moments of doubt and loneliness. These personal accounts showed that love in the 19th century was never simple, shaped by the tension between societal demands and human desire. When the trial night ended, and the dawn crept over the homestead, the fate of the couple was often still uncertain. For some, the experience paved the way to a proper wedding, formalized with church bells and celebration. The evidence gathered during their time together, their behavior, compatibility, and family approval, helped cement the match. In many cases, however, the trial night exposed irreconcilable differences. Disagreements over daily habits, family dynamics, or personal temperaments led to quiet partings, with suitors retreating to pursue other matches or remain single. Some engagements were broken discreetly to avoid public scandal, others more openly as a matter of survival. Yet even those who married carried the memories of their trial night, a private story woven into the fabric of their marriage, sometimes a source of humor, sometimes of regret. Over time, the tradition of trial nights faded, replaced by evolving courtship customs and legal reforms. But the lessons remained. Love was complex, marriage was a negotiation, and sometimes the most intimate moments could not be rushed or hidden. Though marriage trial nights vanished by the late 19th century, their echoes lingered in the rituals and attitudes toward courtship that followed. The very idea of testing compatibility before a full commitment influenced social customs like prolonged engagements, chaperoned visits, and even the emergence of dating as a more public, socially accepted practice. These early experiments in trying before buying also reveal a timeless human impulse, the desire to glimpse the truth beneath appearances. People then, as now, wanted assurance that their choice was wise, that love and practicality might coexist. Legal reforms and shifting social norms gradually outlawed or made impractical such overnight trials. Yet the underlying challenge remained: how to balance personal freedom with communal expectation, passion with prudence. Today's cultural echoes may be subtler: premarital counseling, living together before marriage, or even online dating profiles all reflect this deep-rooted quest to understand a partner fully before binding one's life to theirs. As we close this journey into a forgotten custom, we see that the marriage trial night was more than an oddity. It was an intimate dance of hope, doubt, and courage, revealing how generations before us sought to navigate love's uncertain waters. Behind the formalities and legalities of marriage trial nights were deeply human stories, moments of tenderness, fear, courage, and sometimes heartbreak. Couples faced the stark reality of sharing a bed, a room, and a life's decisions in a way that tested their true feelings and temperaments. Some trials blossomed into lifelong partnerships, their initial awkwardness softened by genuine affection. Others ended in quiet separations, sparing both parties years of misery. Letters, diaries, and court records tell of whispered fears, stolen smiles, and private doubts, a tapestry of emotion woven into this strange custom. Women often bore the heavier burden. Their reputations, futures, and very survival hinged on these nights. Yet many found in the moments of agency, choosing to accept or reject suitors based on lived experience, not just gossip or family pressure. Men, too, revealed vulnerabilities rarely acknowledged in public, grappling with societal expectations of masculinity while navigating intimacy for the first time. This human element, the hopes, the missteps, the courage to try, makes the marriage trial night a profoundly relatable story, reminding us that love's challenges transcend time. As the candlelight flickered low and the hush of night settled over the countryside, the echoes of marriage trial nights lingered long after the guests had gone home. These nights were more than mere rituals. They were a delicate dance of hope, fear, desire, and caution, a rare chance to glimpse the intimate realities behind the grand promises of matrimony. Through whispered conversations, awkward touches, and measured glances, couples and communities navigated the fragile boundary between love and law, between commitment and choice. The trial night was a bold testament to human longing and practical wisdom, a custom that gave agency to those entering the most binding partnership of their lives. Though these nights have long faded into history, their stories endure, reminders that love was never simple, marriage never certain, and the journey to happily ever after often began with hesitation, negotiation, and sometimes, the quiet courage to walk away. So next time you hear tales of old customs or wonder at how our ancestors lived and loved, remember the marriage trial night, a ritual rooted in reality, complexity, and the eternal human quest for connection. And maybe, just maybe, the true story of marriage lies not in vows spoken, but in the trials endured, the choices made, and the courage found in the stillness of that one remarkable night.